one time, you know, our guest speaker and I spent a couple years together at Oxford, and Rick was doing his PhD in arms control, which perfectly qualified him to be a filmmaker. So I thought that was great. But anyway, you'll hear Lisa's going to introduce him. But one time I was walking around these beautiful gardens at Oxford when I was goofing off from studies, which was a regular event. And I was in Merton College in the garden, and I came across a bench. And the bench had a little plaque on it. And by my calculation, the young man was 26, but the bench said, in memory of this boy Krakow, and it simply said he did everything that he could. 26 years old. And I have puzzled over that so often. First, I thought, what an odd thing for parents to say, because who knows, was it suicide? What were the circumstances? But the more I thought about it, the more profound I believe it is that all of us, given the days we have, whether it's 18 years, 26 years, we need to do everything we can to be change agents, to be hopeful, to be just models of civility and love and care and forgiveness. So I start our session with that. And now I'm going to turn over to Lisa Martin. Some of you know Lisa. She's been a member and she's gone on so many international trips with us. And I'm happy to report that Lisa has sold her company and is starting another one, but she's carving out time, thankfully, to be a senior fellow with us. So she will be spending some time interfacing with members, which we're really excited to have her do that. She's a very gifted woman and just a terrific human being who really gets the PathNorth ethos. So Lisa, thank you for doing that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce my dear brother, Rick Stevenson.
Thanks, Doug. And I'm so excited to be a part of this. And anyone who's interested in learning more about how we can make PathNorth more impactful and more meaningful to others, please reach out. I would love to talk to everyone if I could.
Yeah, so in that regard, Seth will send to you all, when he does the summation of the call, Lisa's contact information. She's particularly going to have something, Dar doesn't know this yet, but she's going to do something Dar for women, some kind of call soon to talk about some issues. So anyway.
And I was so excited when I was talking with Melanie and she asked if I would introduce Rick Stevenson, and I am truly a big fan. I was so excited to see your presentation at the annual conference, and then I got to meet your stepson in Washington State and got to see the presentation. I liken him to a Mr. Rogers of today. If we could help people name these feelings they're having to tame them. And so with that, I'll do the formal bio. But again, I'm so glad you're going to be speaking today. Dr. Rick Stevenson has produced, written, and or directed 13 feature films and nearly 100 hours of television. He has worked with Robert Redford, Hugh Grant, Christopher Plummer, Kiefer Sutherland, Meg Ryan, Patrick Dempsey, Jennifer Connelly, Mark Harmon, and many others. He is founder of the 5,000 Days Project, which involves 10,000 kids over 6 continents and has pioneered the practice of personal story mentoring, which helps kids capture and become authors of their own stories. He is the author of 2 books, including 21 Things You Forgot About Being a Kid, based on his 5,700 interviews with kids from 12 countries. He's also co-founded the Film School with Tom Skerritt and Stuart Stern, and is director of its annual Prodigy Camp for the 20 most talented young filmmakers in the world. He has won over 40 awards for his work in film, television, and commercials. and he holds a doctorate from Oxford University, a master's degree from the London School of Economics, a master's degree from Whitman. Rick is married with 4 children. And again, I am so excited to hear you, and I hope we get to have you present again as well. So with that, Rick, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Wow. I especially like the Mr. Rogers thing. That's what he does. So
Wow, we didn't even practice that.
I realize I only have slippers because, you know, I'm in pajamas. So anyway, well, thank you very much. Yeah, it was certainly a highlight of my year last year speaking at PathNorth. And I was thinking, why? And the reason is that everybody there that I met just cares. And it hurts to care. And I either like being surrounded by caring people or hurting people. I don't know which one. But as Doug often says, when somebody shares their weakness, when somebody is vulnerable, when somebody tells their own story, it gives permission for everybody else to tell theirs. So it's an honor to be here at this meeting. Yeah, I was asked just to introduce the 5,000 Days Project. Again, some of you know a bit about it, but it was started at the turn of the century as a means for me to stay home with my new family that I had worked so hard to achieve. And as some of you may know, it's since became the opposite of that in terms of, you know, spreading to all 6 continents. But the original purpose of the 5,000 Days Project was to do a longitudinal documentary about growing up and capture kids answering key life questions once a year in hopes of sort of helping them better discover themselves. But it was going to be a documentary. That's all it was. And the first interview was February 2001. The second was December 2001. And what happened in between was 9/11. And that immediately turned everything around. The project then became not about documentaries, even though we still do some, and much more about helping kids make a movie of their own lives through their own story, through their own words, helping them discover themselves, their purpose, their values, and giving them tools by which they can better navigate this crazy world. And quite frankly, the world has never been crazier than it is now. And it occurred to me the other day that there's been 3 huge sort of life-changing events in my lifetime. The first, when I was a 7-year-old, I was on the playground at Richmond Beach School when I heard that President Kennedy had been shot. The second was 9/11. And the third is this. And so the fact that this project, the 5,000 Days Project, which is roughly the time it takes kids to go through school, the fact that it was really born out of crisis, out of the discovery that kids needed and wanted to talk on a much deeper level, which is really what the process is all about. It's called personal story mentoring. And you can read about it. You probably have links, Melanie. 5,000 days, the 5,000 days project.org/PSM. And it's a process, again, that is helping kids deal with their everyday life and put them in touch with their own emotions and arm themselves with their own deep well of wisdom. And I was asked to share something from the project. Now, the problem is most of the films that we do are 15 minutes long. But I did find this one thing that I put together last year. And it was about two boys in the project that had been best friends that were now having a conflict. And since we live in an age of conflict, even though this is a fairly minor one, it was big to them. I thought I'd just share this 2-minute piece and as a launching pad for starting to talk about personal storytelling. So Seth, do you want to go ahead and show it?
I want you to tell me what happened with Isaac. Are you serious?
You don't want to tell me about it?
No. This one's probably like next level. Don't want to talk about
It's
it.
really painful for you?
Yeah.
Do you care enough about this friendship to want to do something about it, or are you going to walk away from it?
I want it back, but
Me and Nate and Caden were all in Hawaii, and we were playing jackpot. I was the jacker. And then Caden lost. After Hawaii, we hadn't had a play date for 3 months. And now he doesn't want to literally play with me.
we were friends even before like we came to the school, and I still remember that day where we like shook our hands and we were like friends.
The years before, I've been BFFs with him for a long time, and he just decided to just make it fall all apart, and we don't like talk that much.
And you felt blamed?
Yeah, but I was his BFF.
It felt like that day I was being like a jerk, but I'm not sure if that was me or if that was him or if that was both of us. I'm not sure if it was something that I did.
Ever since Hawaii, he's been a bit sensitive.
It's like the Earth's plates. When like they rub against each other, like a fight kind of happens, an earthquake happens.
I've tried to get together with him, but
I can go grab him right now.
That would work out, but
Let's do it. Hold on.
at the taco shop, like you kind of bossed me around a little bit, so.
me and Nate sort of felt like we did something wrong in the pool, the arcade. Tell me what you thought about that.
Oh, that where like I asked to combine my tickets and you guys like, no thanks.
Sorry about that.
Felt like kind of excluding, but
Yeah, we can get to another arcade back in Hawaii. I feel that me and Nate sort of, let's say at the place, I think we sort of were just like not listening to you. I'm sorry about that. Do you want to like fix that back in Hawaii this week?
okay.
Okay, do you guys want to give it a handshake?
Yeah.
I am so excited for you guys to be friends again. You really deserve each other.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So this is just a little slice of what the 5,000 Days Project is about. And it's so funny, I often get a question about how young do you start kids? And I at first thought, well, maybe 8 years old, because that's when they start having sort of an inner life. But I kept getting asked by parents to start early and earlier because they were seeing this process really help their kids. And finally, I was asked to start Caden, who was the little Muslim kid, first kid on the video here, when he was 4 years old. He's 10 here. But I thought, what am I doing when I'm wasting their time, wasting their money? Is this really going to be worth it? But I noticed that he's sitting there. He's like really bothered. 4 years old, just sitting there really bothered. And I got the camera ready and I said, are you okay? And he goes, no. And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, I just found out that the girl that I was going to marry no longer wants to marry me. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, well, she just came up to me on the playground. She pushed me down and said, I no longer want to marry you. And I said, well, that's pretty clear. And I sat marveling while for the next 10 minutes, this little boy processed his pain better than I ever do, verbally. And then at the end of that 10 minutes, he goes, but there's this other girl. And that's when I learned, really all ages, it just helps. It helps to talk. And I have a lot of opinions about, the value of verbal journaling, which is why I do this specific process. And I see Coach Dar nodding there. And I'll tell you a quick story about that too. Some of you might have heard this before, but when I really learned the value of verbal journaling It was when I was staying at my cousin's house, and my nephew Andy wanted to be a 5,000 Days kid. He was 9 years old at the time, and his brother and sister were in the project. And so he asked me, he said, "Uncle Rick, can I do this?" I said, "Sure." And I set up the camera, and he sat down in front of it, and he had this big woolly cap on, and his eyes kind of look out, huge eyes. And I said, "Andy, you ready?" Nods, and he immediately bursts into tears. I said, "Andy, I haven't even asked you a question yet." And he goes, "I know, but I know what you're going to ask me." And I said, "Oh yeah, what's that?" He said, "You're going to ask me, when's the last time I cried and why?" And I said, "Well, that's normally question 7, but it seems like you may know the answer to that." And he nods, and then he proceeds to try to tell me what was upsetting him. And he gets part the way through the story, and he can't go on. And I said, "Andy, I'm here. I'm waiting for you. Whenever you're ready, tell me." And starts again, doesn't make it through. Finally, the third time he makes it through. And what happened was 3 days earlier, he had been asked by his teacher to stand up in his class and to sing the solo he has in the school musical. He did that. The class laughed at him. He burst into tears, and he ran out of the classroom. You know, the sort of thing that would put you in therapy when you're 42 is why you can't speak in front of PathNorth. And so just to get it clear, for stupid filmmaker reasons, I said, "Hey, Andy, could you just tell me the story one more time loud and clear?" Because all I had was this, you know. And so he makes it through the 4th time, makes it through without a problem. And then I get this idea. And I said, "Andy, I promise, last time, do you trust me?" He goes, "Yeah, of course." I said, "Okay. This time I want you to tell this story one last time. But this time, I want you to sing it." And he looked at me kind of strange and goes, "I was in my class and the teacher asked me to sing my solo." And he burst out laughing within 6 minutes of not even being able to get this out of his throat. I saw him vomit it up verbally, hold it in his hand, and laugh at it, and expose it to the healing qualities of air. And that's when I discovered the power of verbal journaling. And what John Medina, who is my good friend, who's a brain scientist who wrote Brain Rules, would tell us, what's basically happened is he's been able to move all of that from the amygdala, which is where all of our emotions are expressed, take 3 deep breaths and get it to his prefrontal lobe, which is where his language and reasoning skills are. And that is the value of verbal journaling. And when I think about everything we're feeling right now, you know, when I see the anger in people and the amount of feeling that this produces, you understand why somebody wants to go out and kill somebody. Somebody did that to your father or your son, or you understand that feeling. And I encourage people to feel all of those feelings, because that's the only way you're going to process it. But the difference between being a psychopath and being a normal person is you don't act on that. You find another way to do it in a way that still keeps the cause central without diverting it in a direction like the stories become so much about violence versus police brutality. And so it just teaches me that we all have so much to learn about celebrating our emotions and experiencing them, but at the same time being able to direct them and become the master of them versus the victim. So that's kind of as far as I'll go right now. Doug, if you want to. I think you're on mute, so I'm lip reading. You're saying, "Rick, you're the most marvelous speaker we've no?
Yeah, Rick.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay. So thank you for that, Rick. Very, very good. Obviously, there's a lot of implications for this moment that we are in. I was having a great conversation with a new member of PathNorth in Boston, Gary Abrasino. I don't know if he's on the call, but we were just talking about how particularly boys and men have a harder time talking about their story and their feelings. And so Rick, what are the implications for this work you're doing for what we're seeing? Because, you know, Martin Luther King said something like this, that riots are a voice for the voiceless. And you almost feel like sometime when we act out, particularly we as men, and do crazy things and say crazy things and act out, so many times that's our voice, because we don't know how to talk like those two 10-year-olds about their feelings. So what are any takeaway you'd say that we should be doing in our schools, or to scale this work to diffuse a lot of the anger that's out there?
Well, I think you described it perfectly. It's exploding right now because it's been so pent up. I think the most important thing we can do is recognize that emotions are the one thing in our life that don't lie to us. When a 10-year-old boy is told, you know, is having some feelings about something, he's told to man up. What's he being told? He's being told that his emotions don't count. He's being told that he can't trust his emotions. He's being told that they aren't real. But the fact of the matter is your emotions are the one thing that don't lie to you. I have interviews with kids where they're going, I'm happy, I really am, and tears are streaming down their face. You know, our minds lie to us. People we trust lie to us. What doesn't lie to us is that genuine feeling of emotion. And when we learn to listen to that and then source that, like, where did that come from? And then allow ourselves to feel that, but then find a way to direct that in a way that doesn't violate someone else's rights, then we become a fully realized human being who can pursue that path. We've all talked about that Lao Tzu said that, you know, the solutions to world peace lie not in governmental solutions and social policies, and as important as those are, they all lie. They come back down to the only thing that will ever change the world is if each one of us own the change in our own lives. If each one of us try to become the best version of ourselves. And so I guess my challenge for schools, it's interesting because I have some projects in England, and it's especially difficult there because a lot of English schools are still very much stuck on the stiff upper lip thing, like, let's be brave, let's push through it. And quite frankly, when you really look at, you know, this sort of stoic response to just pushing through pain and not dealing with it, something that has been celebrated in Western and Eastern literature as the tough person that just, you know, works their way through. When you really look at that in depth in today's society, that's more cowardice than courage. Because what's happening is that you're taking bullets, and instead of going through the pain of surgically removing those bullets, say, no, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, you're riddled with bullets and wondering why emotionally, psychologically, and mental health, you're not healthy. And so I seek us to challenge that tradition of, and granted, when we were running as, you know, prey on the savannah and our son or daughter got taken out, you didn't have time to process it and do that, but we're not doing that. We're not running from prey anymore.
You know, that's really helpful, Rick. And I think the other side of the equation, isn't it learning to listen? I was thinking that, you know, all of us on this call that have children, there's probably conversations we wish we would have had or wish we could even have now. And part of the narrative has been, I'm the adult and I should have answers. I need to fill your mind with all this information. And I guess what I've been learning is the more we listen to somebody, that is a transformative moment for them. So Rick, how can we be better at doing that and is there a time, or is it too late for a lot of us to say, you know, we're already set in this way? Can you still change? These kids, you're helping them articulate and solve problems in a healthier way. Is it ever too late for us to become this better version of ourselves?
It's just never too late. You see people trying to do it on their deathbed, and the only thing you feel bad about is, and they feel bad about, is why didn't they do this earlier? But you know, through going through 5,700 interviews, I realized two things. First of all, we own nothing more valuable than our own story, and so the fact that we can put work. I mean, one of the things we discover when we make that realization that despite our portfolio, despite our, you know, stocks and things like this, that really what we have of value is our own story. Then you start to realize that that's where you should be investing. And that's why I love PathNorth, because that's what PathNorth is all about. So PathNorth is about us coming in our weakness versus our strength, because it's filled with really strong people. It's filled with people that have had, you know, absolutely amazing careers, who have been admired and put on pedestals and being isolated in that case. But when you come and share your story and you're vulnerable, wow, it just opens up. My wife will kill me for telling this story, but at dinner the other night, all of us were sharing about the one time in our lives we stole something from a store. And for me, it was Boy Scout camp when I was 13, and I was under the influence. It was all my fault, but under the influence of a particularly difficult friend. And we stole leather goods from the Scout store, stuck them up our shirts. And like 4 years later, I discovered them in my closet. I'd never put them together or anything like this. But for my kids to be able to hear this and see that, you know, I've made mistakes, that, and everybody shared something like that. It was one of the most beautiful moments. And it just, again, remind me that when you're willing to come in your weakness, when you're willing to tell your story, it opens up the opportunity for everybody else to tell theirs. And that then leads to human connection, which is what we all want.
Yeah, I think we sent out to our PathNorth members this interesting box of questions. And a lot of them are taking those kind of questions that you just referenced, and it enables them to have a different kind of conversation with their families and with each other. So Rick, what would be the three most important takeaways from this work? Obviously, it's been important to you. You've done it for so long, and you know, you put a lot of things on hold to really focus on this. So on the one hand, what are the three takeaways, but also how has it changed you to do this work?
Well, I've mentioned two of the takeaways. One is you have nothing more valuable than your own story. And two, that verbal journaling is even better than written journaling. How has it changed me? That's really what my book is all about, quite frankly. Earlier this year, I wrote a book called 21 Things You Forgot About Being a Kid. And it was all based on this idea that somebody at some point in your life said to you, enjoy high school, it's the best years of your life. And I don't know what your reaction was when you heard that in high school, but mine was sheer panic. It was like, what? This is it? This is all we have to look forward to? And then sure enough, the kids that I'm talking to, 500 kids in two weeks through the Forefront Foundation, almost every one of those kids in pre-measure have said, someone has said that to them, which means we're saying it to our kids. And why do we say it to our kids? We say it to our kids because we've gone through painful experiences that have led to arrested development. We push the bad stuff out. We glamorize which is what creates the generation gap, where we don't actually fully identify with what our kids are going through. And what this project has done for me is really put me in touch with my many stunted areas of emotional development. I will, almost every interview, I will learn something about myself. I think I shared before that my wife had said, Rick, you've taken away so much. Every interview, you come back with some form of learning. And so I don't know how it is for the kid, but it's great for me.
It's great, Rick. So tell us a little about, you have something you call Campfire 101, which is a, gathering place to talk about things that really matter. As you know, one of the cardinal, truths of PathNorth is we're not meant to be alone. We need brothers and sisters on the journey that encourage us, that tell us the truth, that give us perspective. But tell us about what you do in Campfire 101.
Well, it goes back to the oldest of human traditions, where we share stories. That is the oldest of human tradition, and it's the main form of human communication and human connection. I mean, if you think about it, everything everybody does in this group is storytelling, through education, through business, even math is storytelling. I mean, the number 392 means nothing on its own without a story attached to it. The number 365 means something. Number 12 means something. It's jury, 12 Thai boys caught in a cave. I mean, everything is storytelling. And so it's such an essential part of who we are that it's, that I've decided through the many areas I'm privileged enough to be involved in to introduce this idea of Campfire 101. We do it at the Prodigy Camp, which I think Lisa mentioned was for the 20 most talented kids in music and film every year. And they come tasked with the responsibility of talking about the most difficult thing they've ever faced. And I'm going to tell a very quick story about a 14-year-old, one year, was talking about the difficult year that he'd had, how absolutely everything had gone wrong, and how he realized that his depression, his inability to get up in the morning, was just tied to the fact of being afraid of what was coming that day. And so I turned to the group, and as I often do, and I said, okay, let's help him. Today we learned about 3-act structure. We also learned about character arcs. And so what is his character arc? What does he need to learn? Because how are we going to get to where we need to go if we don't know where that is, if we can't state where that is? And that's true for all of us. We're all going through an arc right now of some circumstance, and identifying that arc, which is something we're going to talk about at the end of this, is really vital to creating perspective on your life. So, and if you want to understand really what an arc is, you think of any main character in a movie. For Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, she thought her salvation lies over the rainbow, but soon she learns by the end of the story, she had everything she needs right there at home. For Jean Valjean and Les Mis, he starts out a hardened criminal, but he needs to reach the point in his life where he can accept grace and then eventually give grace. And so I said to the group, what's his arc? And a few people raised their hands and said, well, maybe he needs to make more careful decisions, or maybe he needs to slow his life down, or it's all sorts of recommendations. And there's a 12-year-old kid, youngest kid at the camp. He was a little rap artist, brilliant, maybe the most brilliant person at the camp. And he raises his hands and says, well, doesn't he just need to discover the beauty of the unknown and the possibilities of the unexpected?
Wow.
And
yeah,
I thought that's what we each need to identify in our lives. We need to identify our lives, our arcs, and we need to reach out. Like for most people right now, the difficulty people are having is with the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Like just not knowing what's going to happen. So, is our arc creating more certainty in our life? Well, on one, certainly that helps. But also maybe it's learning to become more uncomfortable with uncertainty and seeing the possibilities and the beauty of it.
Rick, I agree. I think ambiguity is is really the enemy a lot of times. And there's so much ambiguity and uncertainty in life that unless you get comfortable with ambiguity, you're really going to stress out, and you're going to fasten on the things, even if they're wrong, just to have certainty. And so I think I totally agree with you on that point. So you know, there's been a lot discussed and written about IQ, intelligence quotient, and EQ, emotional quotient. And you know, in my book, I look at this study that's really interesting about valedictorians and salutatorians, and how they really never did much with what they had. They had great intelligence, but what was interesting is most of them became either civil servants or worked with a large corporation. Nothing wrong with that, but there was so much promise, and they gave their speech, you know, at the commencement and all that. And so it's really interesting. The ones that really seem to kill it are the ones with strong EQ, that read people, that really are strong on imagination and risk-taking and things like that. What do you think is the relationship between the two, EQ versus IQ?
Well, I think that's such a key question. And I think,
by the way, you have both.
I'm working on it. It's such a key question. It's interesting. When I've done my project at Oxford, I have never seen a group of people with higher IQs and lower EQs.
Yeah.
And to think that that's the way they're training the nation to lead the nation. And there's a dysfunctionality in not having both. This is a crazy thing to do, but I believe this is at the core of how we solve our education problem without even spending more money. And
this is a trick question. Yeah. Jim Delaney like this, he could securitize this program.
Now, I don't know if I can actually play this. Seth, forgive me. I'm springing something crazy on you. If I were to show you this screen, can anybody see it?
It's a picture of you in a bathing suit.
I'm going to show the beginning of it, Doug, and if it's unviewable, raise your hand and I'll tell you what's going on in it. But it's a 1-minute animation that tells a story that I made. Okay. And
so far, I can't see it.
So sorry if it doesn't work, guys. Here we go. You ready?
Contrary to popular belief, the brain's primary function is not learning. It's a survival organ. It's our emotions and relationships, or what artists and poets have described as the heart, that determines what we're interested in. For instance, the brain only becomes interested in maths when it can see that it has some value. And emotions come into play. Nobody likes to be laughed at. When our current model for education was established in the 19th century, we did not have access to brain science, nor the science of well-being, and hence we did the obvious. We put the brain as the engine, and the heart as the carriage. But now, thanks to research, we know that by allowing the heart to be the engine and the brain to be the carriage, our children will do better both in academics and in life. It's what great teachers have been doing all along. After all, Socrates did not say, "Know maths." He said, "Know thyself, and everything else will follow."
So I made that for a school called Geelong Grammar School, which is sort of the Eton of Australia. It's where Kerry Packer and all the prime ministers and everybody went. And 10 years ago, they decided to demote academics and promote student wellness. And now they, because of the brain science, that says we learn when we're emotionally ready to learn. And the thing that I've discovered, this is super fascinating. The thing I've discovered when I brought my project like to Zambia or to Cambodia, those classrooms have 100 kids in them. They barely have enough seats to sit on. They don't have enough pencils, don't have anything. And they have one teacher up there just rattling on, none of the sort of bells and whistles that we have in our education system. And yet those students are so grateful to be there that the gratitude allows them to learn. Now you look at our school system, and our school system is filled with kids that have taken the cues from us who say, oh, you have to go to school versus you get to go to school. When did that happen? I mean, for like over 100 years now, I think we've been passing on this attitude. And my father was a school superintendent. And it was like, I have to go to school versus get. Obviously, a student that is grateful to be there, that has gratitude, is going to learn a lot better than someone that does it grudgingly. Like right now, kids go to school as a prison sentence, and they only go there to visit their fellow inmates. And
That's true.
And despite all that, you know, we have the best education, we have the best educators, we have the best innovators, we have incredible education in this country. But this simple change, societal change, if we could create a sense of gratitude, that would make so much difference. And that's an EQ question versus an IQ question. And that,
you know, Rick, they're starting, if we could,
learning
maybe, well, they're starting to do meditation, and I'm just thinking maybe they can start layering on meditation. Absolutely. And then making lists of gratitude and things like that. Okay, so we don't have much time, but I want to open it up for anybody that has a question. You could either raise it or type it or whatever you would like. I think somebody has done that before, but I don't know where these questions actually go. So Seth would. But if you have a question, just either speak it out or type.
And also just one other thing, Melanie had asked me to put together, so I want to make sure we fit this in by the end, 7 questions I ask to tell your pandemic story. So
Rick, I'll go ahead and share that now, and then I have a few questions coming in that I can go ahead and ask for the group.
Okay, so these are 7 questions to help you. Okay, read those, Rick.
Excuse me, just one sec. It's actually backwards on my screen because
I can read them off for you, Rick. So the 7 questions to help tell your pandemic story. So Rick shared these with us earlier this week. So where were you, and what was your first reaction when you learned you were going to have to quarantine at home for weeks? What has been the most difficult aspect of it for you? What has been the most positive thing, either expected or unexpected, to come out of this? Tell a story about someone or something that inspired you, angered you, moved you, or made you laugh during this time. In what ways has this pandemic brought out the best and worst in you? If you were the main character in a movie, you would have an arc representing how this trial changed you. What have you learned about yourself or your life? How are you different today than you were before this pandemic started? If you found a friend online dwelling in despair and darkness over this, what would you tell them?
Thanks, Seth.
Good. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's open it up. Do we have any questions, Seth, that people have typed in, or anybody want to?
So I have a question here from Amy McGowan. Hello, Amy. Does anyone else find it interesting that the parents of the young boys who were in a conflict, which the parents would have witnessed by the halt of the boys' play date, didn't work with the boys with conflict resolution?
I'm so sorry I didn't hear that. One more time.
So in the video we watched earlier with the 2 young boys who were in conflict, which we assume the parents may have witnessed as they were young, and by the halt of the play date, why wasn't there any conflict resolution or anything related to what the parents saw or the parents' interactions with that situation?
So in other words, why didn't the parents step up and do something?
Yeah, or like what because they were in a group together. I assume, and Amy, if you want to pipe in with any follow-up as well.
Well, so this is a very interesting story. First of all, really 2 great sets of parents. So that's a great question. Like, why didn't that happen? But you'll find that in Isaac, the second boy, there's a great fear that he has of doing something wrong. And so it took getting through all of those fears and finding out it was okay to do something wrong before he could even come to terms that he may have been complicit in setting this whole thing up. And that was sort of reflected, because parents want to support their kids, in the discussion between the parents. And it was just a matter of time, because as I said, they're really great parents. But you want to support your kid, and sometimes you want them to work it out, which eventually they did. I just helped facilitate it, that's all. But both these kids are wonderfully articulate and emotionally getting there, being emotionally mature.
Good. So lightning round question before Seth asks the other. How long do you think this project will continue?
Oh, well, you asked me earlier how this changed me. One thing I've struggled with my whole life is impatience. I have always been the victim. I talk about myself being this actor and, acting on my purposes and intents and things like this. One thing it's always victimized me is impatience. It's been a horrible thing for me. Well, there is nothing like starting a project that never ends to solve the problem of impatience. And so I've pretty much dedicated the rest of my life to this. I will die doing this project. And I just feel sorry for the poor kid that's there, as what they're going to do with the body, but and I have a team of people now that are developing this personal story mentoring, but I will die doing this project because it's the process. It's not the product at the end.
Okay, good. Next question, Seth.
Sure. So a question from Ann Fitzpatrick. Specifically with that video, how did you meet the two kids, and was it through the parents? And for all the 5,000 kids and all the kids you've interviewed, how do they come to you? How do you find them, and how do you interview them?
Again, you can read about it at the 5000daysproject.org/PSM, Personal Story Mentoring. It kind of explains the whole process there. We have schools approach us, we have organizations approach us, and we also have individuals approach us. And we try to accommodate as many kids as we possibly can going through this process. And we do charge parents, so they pay for half of the cost of the project. And every time a parent pays for their half, it also funds another kid in Cambodia or Zambia or whatever. So 50% of the kids in our project are scholarship kids. And so anybody can really access it who wants to. So if there's somebody you think is going to be particularly served by this, I encourage you to look at that, and we'll see what we can do. Quite frankly, we were restricted up until 3 months ago. If we weren't in Washington, D.C., it was hard to do a project with kids there. We do have projects at several cities around the world. It's easy to fit in kids like that. But then came the pandemic and Zoom. And I suddenly discovered, I don't know, Coach Dar, what your experience has been. You've probably been doing this forever, but this is the first time I've ever done virtual interviews. And you get a kid sitting in their bedroom surrounded by their teddy bears and their stuffies, and you get a good interview. They feel really comfortable and really confident in that setting. So it's kind of opened up a whole new world to include a lot more kids, because I want this project to spread.
Great. Anybody else?
I just want to say.
This is Jim McClung. I had a question. You mentioned the kids that seem to react the most or the best are those who've had some conflict and have been through an experience like that. Let's assume that's true. Does that mean that some kid that plays sports where you win and where you lose and you have a scoreboard are better prepared for these type of situations than those who don't play a conflict sport, such as whatever the sport is?
Good question. I would say yes and no. Yes, to the extent that I would always encourage they develop their physical side, and playing sports is really the best way to do that in school. No, I would say unless they learn the value of, I'm sorry, my phone just went off, hold on. Where they learn the value of where their self-worth comes from. What I've found with 90% of kids going through this project is they struggle most with basing their self-worth in winning and losing, in external forms of validation, in achievement, than where the real source is, and that is yourself and your character. And I think I have seen so many kids go through stress, go through so much trial and tribulation because they feel like they're not good enough, or because they're all achievement oriented and they can't reach the perfection that's, quite frankly, no one ever can reach, nor should they reach. It's a sickness in our society. And so I think it's important to learn to win and lose, but it's important to keep that in perspective so that you win as part of the game, but you don't win as part of defining as the definition of yourself. Because what happens then is most kids, if they excel in sports in high school and go on, and most of them don't do it in college, suddenly that thing on which they based all of their sort of self-worth and confidence is ripped away.
You know, Rick, one thing on that, we should have a whole discussion about sports, and Wendy, you'd be a good one to pull into that, and others. But I remember growing up, so many of the values I learned were on the playground, but very informal. You didn't have a professional facilitator or coach. You had a pickup basketball game, and you'd play the winner. You get a group, they'd play the winner. But if somebody was a jerk, the group dealt with them. It wasn't always an authority figure you had to go grab. And I think we all learn so much about, who we are in those kind of contexts. If you go to a playground now, most playgrounds are totally empty, even before the pandemic, because I think a lot of parents are afraid of their kids being out, unsupervised, and they're just programmed to the hilt. So there's no chance for imagination or dreaming up stuff the way so many did. Okay, one last question. Do we have one, Seth?
Let's see. Here we go.
Coach Carr had something to say.
So a question from Amy McGowan. Pro football players process beginning their games from their previous seasons. However, the conflict was never resolved in a public way. Do you believe there would be a benefit to take oral histories of the players to help to hear their stories and the traumas they've suffered?
Seth, could you read that slower? I'm so sorry.
Sure. So
I'll sum it up. Do you think there's any value in professional football players, for example, telling their story when they were traumatized or things they went through to capture what shaped them, good, bad, and ugly?
Oh gosh, yes. In fact, I think that's some of the most powerful witnesses. Obviously, sports heroes, music heroes, things like this. When they're willing to share their story, and especially their weakness, it counteracts which is sort of a sickness of Facebook. I think there's a lot of good things about Facebook too, but the bad thing about Facebook is projecting this image that everything's great when it's not. Many people have often called the 5,000 Days Project the anti-Facebook because it's about who they really are and what they're really struggling with. And I don't think we're particularly served by projecting perfection, and certainly not by fiction. And so when you can get somebody that's sort of glamorized through the publicity process, through sports, through music, whatever, that can really be honest, be true and authentic, wow, that changes lives. I've seen it change so many lives.
Thank you, Rick. This has been great. I love what Maya Angelou, the poet, laureate and Nobel Prize winner said, she said, people will not remember what you said or what you did, but they will remember what you felt, what they felt when they were with you. And you realize so much of life is a connection on this other level, the human level. It isn't just debating ideas. And this is part of the problem, I think, in the culture war, where arguing doesn't get you any place. It's got to be, how do you understand somebody's story that got them to where they took this position on something, you know? Well, Rick, thank you for, Rick is an honorary member of PathNorth, and we have these unique honorary members who are in the arts and sports and creative fields, because it helps us think differently about who we are as people, you know? So thank you, Rick. We really, really appreciate your imagination and dreaming all this up. So this is good. So with that,
Rick,
let me, go ahead,
I just
Lisa.
want to let you know, Rick's book is also on Audible. Your 21 Things. I listen to the book. So.
Okay, Rick's book. And there's another great book out too that is a companion to that. It's called Rethinking Success.
And if you buy my book, you'll get a free copy of Doug's book.
Exactly. I always followed you everywhere. It's good. Okay, well, thank you all so much. And with
Thank
that,
you, Rick.
Seth, do you have anything for us in terms of what's coming up next?
Most certainly. So next Wednesday, June 10th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have our PathNorth community call with Ray Saldana, who is the new president and CEO of Communities and Schools, along with Dan Dominic, who is the executive director of AASA, the School Superintendents Association, on our current.
So let me tell you why if I can say why that's important. I think we've heard about food insecurity, that so many kids in America have a meal every day because they get it in the school, and that's gone now. So Communities and Schools is one of the largest organizations that's leaning into that problem, and we're just going to learn about how it's working and what they're doing. It's fascinating what they do. It's really important. This other guy heads the association of all the superintendents across the country. So he'll give us a picture of what's happening with kids not going to school. Are they falling behind? You know, we hear all these things, but what's really happening? So it should be pretty interesting.